No one at Harrison and Vale Industries ever paid much attention to the night staff. They moved silently through the endless hallways after business hours, pushing their cleaning carts like ghosts that erased the traces left behind by the powerful. To most executives, they were almost invisible, but not to Alexander Vale. Alexander had built the company from the ground up and was known for two things: his ruthless business instincts and his obsession with observing every detail around him. He believed that the truth about people was found not in their words, but in their habits. That was why, on that particular Wednesday evening, after everyone had left, he found himself standing behind the half-open door of his office, watching someone he had never really noticed before. Her name was Elena Duarte, a cleaning lady in her early 30s, quiet, efficient, always polite, and always gone before sunrise. Alexander had seen her dozens of times, but only as a passing shadow. That night, however, something about her caught his attention. The way she paused for a moment at his window, staring out at the city lights, with an expression he could not decode. It wasn't sadness exactly, but something deeper, something heavy. She didn't know he was there. She never looked around. She simply stood there, gripping the handle of her cleaning cart with both hands, breathing slowly, as though gathering strength for something beyond her shift. Something inside Alexander clicked. He didn't understand it, but he felt it, an unusual spark of curiosity that refused to go away. When she finished cleaning his office and stepped into the hallway, he made a decision he had never made in his entire career. He followed her, not with hostility, not with suspicion, but with an unexplainable urge to understand who she really was. He waited several minutes to avoid being noticed, then took the emergency stairs and descended one floor below her. He could hear the faint squeak of her cartwheels, echoing ahead. She moved methodically, cleaning room after room with almost ritualistic precision. She never rushed. She never complained. There was a grace to her movements, a discipline that reminded him of someone who carried burdens no one else could see. As he followed her intently, he noticed small details he had never bothered to see before: the worn-out heel of her shoes, the patched sleeve of her uniform, the bandage around her wrist as though she had sprained it but couldn't afford to rest. Every now and then she stopped, placed a hand against her lower back, and took a breath that sounded like someone pushing themselves far beyond their limits. Hours passed. Midnight approached. Alexander wasn't sure what he expected to find. Maybe that she was stealing office supplies, or meeting someone secretly, or hiding something in the storage rooms. But nothing seemed unusual. And yet, his curiosity only grew stronger. When her shift ended at 2 a.m., she left the building through the staff door. The night was cold, the kind of cold that sticks to your bones. Alexander put on a dark coat and followed her at a distance, an odd mixture of guilt and fascination weighing on him. He wasn't a man who followed employees. He wasn't even a man who cared about their private lives. But something about Elena felt different, as if an invisible thread was pulling him along. She didn't take the bus stop. She didn't call a taxi. She walked. For more than 20 minutes, she crossed streets, passed under flickering streetlights, and moved through neighborhoods that Alexander had never stepped foot in. The millionaire had cars worth more than entire houses here, and yet here he was, walking behind a woman whose monthly salary barely covered basic necessities. The deeper they went into the residential district, the more Alexander felt the cold reality of inequality pressing against him. This was a part of life that had never touched him. Not really. He had seen it from afar, from the insulated windows of his penthouse, but he had never felt it. Tonight, he felt everything. As he followed her around a corner, he saw her stop suddenly in front of an old, run-down building. The facade was crumbling. The lights in the hallway flickered weakly. There was graffiti on the door. She looked around once, as if making sure no one dangerous was nearby, then entered. Alexander stood across the street, his breath forming small clouds in the air. This building should have been condemned years ago. Why would she live here? She worked 6 nights a week. She was punctual, dedicated. Why wasn't she living in a better place? Questions flooded him. But then something else happened, something that made his heartbeat quicken for reasons he didn't understand. Elena didn't go upstairs. Instead, she walked around the building to a narrow alleyway. Alexander approached quietly, keeping to the shadows. That was when he saw her kneel beside a rusted metal door tucked behind dumpsters, almost hidden from the street. She knocked, 3 times, softly. The door opened from within. What Alexander saw made him freeze in place. Elena stepped inside and disappeared into a dim room filled with, but he didn't get a clear view. Not yet. He heard whispering, movement, the faint glow of a candle. Something, or someone, shifted inside. His heart pounded. A million thoughts raced through his mind. Was she involved in something illegal? Was she leading a double life? Was he about to discover something dark? He stepped closer, just enough to see a sliver of the room through the partially open door. His breath caught in his throat. What he saw in that moment would change his life forever. But the truth of what Elena was hiding behind that hidden door, would only be revealed at the very end of the story. Jonathan sat behind the wheel of his black sedan, the engine humming softly beneath him as he watched Elena leave through the side exit of the building. The street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement, stretching toward her as she walked with slow, tired steps, clutching her old brown purse close to her side. She didn't look around, didn't pause, didn't even notice him parked half a block away. She simply moved forward as someone who had lived that same routine for far too long. He waited until she crossed the corner before he quietly pulled out of the parking space, keeping a careful distance. He wasn't sure why he was doing this. It felt irrational, impulsive, and yet a strange instinct gnawed at him. Something inside whispered that he had to follow her, that there was something he needed to see for himself. Elena walked several blocks, her posture gradually tightening as she passed through dimly lit streets where the buildings grew older and the sidewalks cracked. The city looked different here, smaller, forgotten, the kind of place Jonathan had never personally stepped into, despite living in the same metropolis for decades. He watched her adjust her coat as a cold breeze swept through, lifting loose strands of hair that had escaped her simple bun. Finally, she stopped at a bus stop. Not one of the newer ones with digital screens and glass walls, but an old metal bench half covered in peeling paint. She sat down and took a slow breath, rubbing her hands to warm them. Jonathan's chest tightened. How long had she been living like this? But it was what happened next that puzzled him. Instead of boarding the next bus that arrived, Elena let it pass. And the next. And the next. She wasn't waiting for transportation. She was waiting for something, or someone. After nearly 40 minutes, she rose and began walking again. Jonathan followed at a careful pace. She crossed into an even poorer district, where streetlights flickered and stray cats darted between trash bins. But Elena didn't slow down. Her steps became purposeful, almost urgent. She turned into a narrow alleyway. Jonathan's heartbeat quickened. He parked quickly, got out of the car, and followed her on foot, staying far enough back so she couldn't hear him. Then he saw it. At the end of the alley stood an old, worn-down building with broken windows patched with cardboard. The metal door was rusted and dented, and yet Elena knocked gently as though it were the entrance to a cathedral. The door opened just a crack. A child's face peered through. A little boy. The moment he saw Elena, he lit up with a joy so pure it struck Jonathan like a blow to the chest. "Mama!" the child cried, throwing the door open. Elena dropped to her knees and wrapped him in her arms, her body trembling. Not from cold, but from a suffering that had finally found relief. She kissed the top of his head again and again, whispering apologies and promises in a voice heavy with exhaustion and love. Jonathan froze, unable to move. He hadn't known she was a mother. He hadn't known she was fighting this hard just to get through one more day. Minutes later, a thin, pale woman emerged. From inside, probably a neighbor, or maybe someone who was helping Elena watch the child while she worked long shifts. Elena handed the woman a few folded bills, money she desperately needed herself. Jonathan saw it. He saw everything, and his heart, so used to numbers, strategies, growth charts, and profit margins, ached in a way he hadn't felt in years. He watched Elena and her son walk together to a small corner store. She bought him a carton of milk and a loaf of bread, counting coins carefully, twice, to make sure she could afford both. She didn't buy anything for herself, not one thing. Then they returned to the building. She tucked her son into a makeshift bed, kissing him with a tenderness stronger than anything Jonathan had ever seen in his world of polished luxury. All the while, he stood hidden in the shadows, witnessing a kind of silent heroism he had never once recognized in the people who cleaned his floors, polished his windows, or emptied his trash. Elena stayed for only an hour before preparing to leave again. Her son clung to her shirt, not wanting to let go. "Mamá tiene que trabajar mañana," she whispered, smoothing his hair back. But you always leave, the boy said, his voice cracking. Elena swallowed her pain so deeply that Jonathan felt it from where he stood. I leave so you can have a future, mi amor. She kissed his forehead one last time, then forced herself to walk out the door, her shoulders shaking. Jonathan retreated to his car, ashamed, stunned, and unable to breathe normally. Everything he thought he knew about her life had collapsed in an instant, and something inside him shifted. He didn't drive home. He didn't even start the engine. He sat there in the dark street, staring at his trembling hands, realizing that for the first time in years, he felt deeply human, and this was only the beginning. Jonathan barely slept that night. Even after driving home, after walking through the silent marble halls of his mansion, after removing his tie, with shaking fingers, the image of Elena's trembling shoulders as she left her son kept echoing in his mind, like a memory carved into stone. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but even the burn of the alcohol did nothing to quiet the storm inside him. His house, usually a sanctuary of order and glass and expensive art, suddenly felt sterile, like a museum of a life lived without soul. He sat in his leather armchair, staring at the fireplace, but all he could see was a crumbling room, a child's smile, and a mother who gave everything while receiving nothing. When morning came, Jonathan arrived at his company earlier than usual. He walked through the lobby, but this time he didn't see the expensive floors or the designer lighting. He saw Elena kneeling there at night, scrubbing stains with aching hands just to feed her son a loaf of bread. It changed him, and it confused him. He headed straight to his office without greeting anyone. His assistant, Melissa, followed him inside, surprised by his distracted expression. Everything all right, sir? She asked carefully. Jonathan hesitated. For the first time in years, he considered telling someone what he had seen. But how could he? He didn't even understand it himself. Yes, he finally said. I'm fine. But it was a lie, and the lie weighed on him. He began to watch her differently. When Elena arrived that afternoon for her shift, Jonathan observed her through the security monitors, not with suspicion, but with a strange, quiet awe. She moved with the same humility as always, her face calm, almost serene. Yet now he saw the exhaustion beneath her eyes. He saw the sacrifices behind her silence. She wasn't simply working, she was surviving, and protecting a child who depended on her. Every time she bent to pick up a piece of trash, every time she carried heavy bags of cleaning supplies, Jonathan felt a punch of guilt in his chest. He had never taken the time to see her humanity before. He had hired her through an agency, approved her wages without thought, and never once imagined that the woman cleaning his company was living in conditions that no one should endure. It wasn't just empathy anymore. It was responsibility. The questions he tried to avoid. As the hours passed, Jonathan felt a new, unsettling sensation, an urge to do something, anything, to help. But part of him resisted. Would she feel embarrassed, insulted, afraid? Would it seem like pity, charity, or worse, interference? He didn't want to cross boundaries. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, but doing nothing felt unbearable. That evening, he waited by the elevator until Elena stepped inside, ready to begin her night shift. She startled slightly when she saw him, clearly not used to having the company's owner share the same lift. "Good evening, Mr. Hale," she said softly, keeping her eyes low. Jonathan's pulse quickened. He wanted to say so many things, but none of the words forming in his mind felt right. So he said the simplest one. "Good evening, Elena." The elevator doors closed, sealing them inside a quiet metal box. The silence between them stretched, heavy, almost awkward. But Elena didn't speak unless spoken to. She held her cleaning cart with both hands, her knuckles pale from tension. Jonathan noticed the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit he had never seen before. "You've been working here for almost 2 years, haven't you?" he asked gently. Elena nodded. "Yes, sir." "Do you like the job?" She hesitated. The truth flickered in her eyes, but she hid it behind a polite smile. "I'm grateful for it," she said. Grateful. Not happy. Not comfortable. Not secure. Just grateful to have something. Jonathan swallowed hard as the elevator doors opened on her floor. "Well, if you ever need anything, Elena, my door is open." She gave a small, shy nod, then pushed her cart down the hallway. Jonathan watched her go, feeling a strange mix of frustration and helplessness. He wanted to say, "I saw everything," He wanted to admit I followed you. He wanted to confess, you deserve so much more than this life has given you. But he said nothing. Not yet. The unexpected collapse. 2 days later, everything changed again. Jonathan was reviewing quarterly reports in his office when he received an urgent knock on the door. It was the head of maintenance. "Sir, you should come to the basement. It's Elena." Jonathan's heart dropped. He rushed toward the service stairs, practically running. When he reached the basement, he found a small crowd of workers gathered around Elena, who was slumped against the wall, pale, sweating, and gasping for breath. She had fainted. Jonathan knelt beside her instantly, something that shocked everyone around them. "Elena, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice tight with fear he hadn't felt in years. Her eyes fluttered open weakly. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Just tired. I haven't eaten yet." Jonathan felt something inside him break. She hadn't eaten. He turned sharply to the others. "Call an ambulance now." "No," Elena pleaded, struggling to sit up. "Please, no hospital. I can't miss work again. I won't be able to pay." "Stop," Jonathan said firmly but not unkindly. "Your health comes first." Then she whispered something that shook him to the core. "I can't lose this job. It's all my son and I have." Her voice cracked, and Jonathan saw tears forming in her eyes, tears she was clearly trying to hide. In that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't just a woman with a difficult life. This was a woman drowning silently, carrying burdens no one should carry alone. And Jonathan made a promise in that basement, without saying it aloud, without announcing it to anyone. He would not allow her to fall again. He would not allow her son to live in fear or in scarcity. He would do something, anything, to change their lives, because now he understood something deeper than compassion. He understood purpose. Jonathan arrived at work earlier than usual the next week. He intentionally spent time in parts of the company he rarely visited: the storage rooms, the service halls, the laundry areas, the supply closets. He wanted to understand everything Elena had to navigate every day, and what he found shocked him more than he expected. Old cleaning equipment that barely functioned, heavy containers that required strength most workers didn't have, cracked gloves, broken carts, no heating in the basement, no proper break room. He had built an empire that was cutting edge on the top floors, while the workers beneath kept everything running in conditions he had never bothered to check. His heart clenched. How many Elenas had he ignored over the years? This wasn't just a story about one woman anymore. It was a story of neglect, his neglect. He called the maintenance team and the HR director to his office immediately. "We're rebuilding everything," he said flatly. "Everything, sir?" the HR director asked. "Yes. The cleaning department gets new tools, new equipment, new break rooms, new heating system. And effective today, everyone in maintenance, sanitation, and support receives a wage increase." The HR director blinked. "Sir, that's a substantial cost." Jonathan's stare hardened. The cost of ignoring humans is higher. No one questioned him again. But even after implementing these changes, something gnawed at him, because none of this addressed the storm inside him that had been set into motion the night he followed Elena home. This wasn't about equipment. This was personal. He tried to speak to her, and failed. The next evening, Jonathan found Elena in the hallway near the elevators again. She was reorganizing supplies, her movements slower than usual, likely still recovering from the fainting episode. He approached her carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Elena," he said softly. She immediately stood straighter, wiping her hands on her apron nervously. "Yes, Mr. Hale." Jonathan hesitated. The words he wanted to say crowded his throat, but the complexity of the situation weighed him down. "I heard you've been feeling better," he said instead. "I'm glad." She gave a small nod. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate the concern." He tried again, searching for a bridge between their worlds. "Elena, if you ever find yourself in a difficult situation, if you need assistance." Her expression tightened instantly. "No, sir. Please," she said quietly. "I don't want trouble, but I need this job," she whispered. "I don't want anyone to think I ask for favors." And Jonathan understood. Her pride wasn't arrogance. It was survival. Accepting help in her world could be misinterpreted. It could cost everything. So he swallowed his urge to insist and let her continue her work, even though his heart ached as he walked away. A glimpse into her world. But fate had other plans. 3 days later, Elena didn't show up for work. The cleaning supervisor called Jonathan directly. something that had never happened before. "Sir, Elena didn't arrive, and she's never absent. I'm worried." Fear surged through him. He grabbed his coat, canceled all his meetings, and left the building within minutes. This wasn't the professional, calculated Jonathan Hale the world knew. This was a man driven by instinct and worry he could no longer hide. He drove straight to the building he had seen her enter weeks before, the rundown place where her son lived. The hallway smelled of dampness and peeling paint. Every step echoed with questions he wasn't prepared to face. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. This time, a voice from inside, a weak, hoarse voice, muttered something. He opened the door cautiously, and his breath caught in his throat. The truth he didn't expect, Elena was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, holding her son in her arms. The child was burning with fever. Elena looked exhausted, pale, and terrified. She looked up at Jonathan with shock and confusion. "Mr. Hale? What are you doing here?" Jonathan knelt beside her without thinking. "Elena, why didn't you call someone? Why didn't you go to a hospital?" Because she couldn't. He already knew the answer before she opened her trembling lips. "I don't have insurance. I can't afford the hospital bill. Her voice broke. "I didn't want to lose my job for missing work." Jonathan closed his eyes, fighting the burning in his chest. "Elena," he whispered, "you're not alone anymore." Her eyes widened, shimmering with tears she had been holding back for far too long. He helped lift the boy carefully. The child moaned, his forehead hot against Jonathan's hand. Jonathan didn't hesitate. "We're going to the best hospital in the city," he said firmly. "But, sir," no arguments. His tone left no space for refusal. He carried the child to his car while Elena followed, trembling with fear and gratitude tangled together. When they arrived at the hospital, he handled everything. Papers, costs, consultations, tests. Elena sat in silence, overwhelmed, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. Her son was admitted immediately with severe influenza and dehydration, a condition that could have become life-threatening if untreated. When the doctor left the room, Elena broke. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to see this. I tried to do everything right. I tried to protect him. I tried." Jonathan leaned forward gently. "Elena," he whispered, "you have nothing to apologize for. Nothing." She looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "You don't even know us. Why are you helping me?" Jonathan inhaled deeply. He could have told her the truth right then. He could have revealed everything he had seen. The nights, the alleyway, the struggles, the selflessness that had shaken his world. But instead, he spoke the only truth he understood completely. "Because you deserve better." She stared at him, speechless. Jonathan remained at the hospital for hours, refusing to leave until her son stabilized. He sat beside them, watching Elena stroke her child's hair with a tenderness that made his heart ache for reasons he still didn't fully understand. By the time dawn approached, Jonathan stepped into the hallway, leaning against the wall as exhaustion washed over him. His life had changed, and he hadn't even realized how profoundly. Not yet, because the greatest revelation of all, the moment that would alter everything he believed. Jonathan returned home after sunrise, but he did not feel like the same man who had walked into that hospital hours earlier. He entered his mansion, vast, polished, and immaculate, and suddenly it felt suffocatingly empty. The silence echoed through the hallways like a reminder of a life lived only in the pursuit of status and profit. He sat on the edge of his bed, his hands trembling slightly, overwhelmed by the mixture of exhaustion and emotion that clung to him like a second skin. He had never carried a sick child in his arms. He had never stayed awake through the night to support someone who desperately needed help. He had never felt responsible, not like this, for another human being's survival. For years he had protected his empire. Now he was beginning to protect something else, someone else, and he could no longer deny it. The days that followed changed everything. Elena's son, Matteo, remained in the hospital for nearly a week. Flu complications triggered other issues the doctors needed to monitor. Jonathan visited every day. At first, Elena resisted, insisting he didn't need to trouble himself, but Jonathan ignored her protests. He brought food. He handled doctor updates. He spoke to nurses when Elena was too overwhelmed or too shy to ask questions. He even brought toys and children's books for Matteo. Slowly, Elena stopped resisting his presence. What began as hesitation turned into trust, trust turned into gratitude, and gratitude into a kind of fragile bond neither of them had foreseen. Jonathan found himself sitting in that hospital room more comfortably than he had ever felt in his corner office. He spent hours listening to Elena speak softly to her son in Spanish, stories about stars, oceans, and dreams she hoped he would one day reach. She thought Jonathan wasn't listening, but he absorbed every word. And when Mateo began to recover, the joy in Elena's eyes made Jonathan feel something he hadn't felt in decades. Purpose. Not corporate purpose. Not financial purpose. Real purpose. The kind that comes from touching another life. A window into her past. One evening, while Mateo slept peacefully, Elena finally opened up, slowly, carefully, as though every detail of her life was a fragile secret. "I wasn't always here," she said softly. "I had a home, a husband, dreams." Jonathan listened in silence. "We moved to this country for a better life, but things fell apart. He lost his job. He became angry, then violent." She paused, her eyes lowering. "I left with Mateo. We had no money, no family here. I took whatever work I could find, cleaning, night shifts, anything." Jonathan's heart tightened with each word. "I never finished school. I never had opportunities. I just learned to survive." She swallowed hard. "I promised Mateo I would never let him see hunger again, but some days I failed." Her voice trembled on the last sentence. Jonathan's chest ached. He had heard countless stories of hardship in business negotiations, in charity cases, in board meetings about community outreach, but none of them had ever touched him like this. None of them had faces. None of them looked at their child with the fierce love Elena had in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered suddenly, catching him off guard. "For what?" he asked. "For treating us like we matter." Jonathan couldn't speak for a moment. No one had ever thanked him for being human. A shift in the company. Back at the company, rumors circulated. People noticed the changes Jonathan had made: new equipment, higher wages, renovated rooms. They spoke quietly in hallways, wondering what had caused the sudden shift in the notoriously strict CEO. Some assumed a public scandal was coming. Others thought he was preparing to sell the company. A few whispered that maybe Jonathan Hale had grown a conscience. But no one guessed the truth. He had simply witnessed injustice too closely to ignore it. And while Elena never asked for special treatment, Jonathan quietly made sure her schedule was lighter for the next few weeks. He arranged for her to receive paid medical leave while Mateo recovered. Without telling her, it came from his own pocket. But even as he tried to support her quietly, he struggled with one thing. He still hadn't told her the truth. He hadn't said, "I followed you that night. I saw where you live. I saw how hard you fight." The confession sat like a stone in his stomach. He knew that when the moment came, it could break the fragile trust between them or strengthen it forever. But the right time hadn't arrived. Not yet. An invitation that changed everything. When Mateo finally left the hospital, smiling, walking, and holding his mother's hand, Jonathan drove them home personally. Elena tried to refuse the ride, but he insisted gently. When they arrived at her building, Elena looked embarrassed. Jonathan understood why. The entrance was cracked, the windows broken, the stairway dark and unlit. He spoke softly. "Elena, you shouldn't have to raise a child here." She lowered her head. "I don't have a choice." Jonathan took a deep breath. "May I help you find a better place to stay?" Elena stiffened. "Sir, please, don't feel obligated. You've already done so much. I can't accept." "I'm not offering charity," he interrupted gently. "I'm offering safety." Her eyes softened, but she didn't answer. They stood in that dim hallway, the air filled with the tension of two worlds trying to understand each other, trying to find a bridge. When he left that night, Jonathan couldn't shake the image of Mateo crawling into a small, damp bed with peeling wallpaper behind him. He made a decision the moment he returned home. He called his lawyer. "Find available apartments in good neighborhoods," he said. "Something safe, something with schools nearby." "For you, sir?" "No," Jonathan whispered. "For someone who deserves it." A sudden emergency. But before Jonathan could present the offer, another emergency struck. 3 days later, Elena didn't come to work again. This time it wasn't Mateo. It was her. The cleaning supervisor found her sitting on the floor of the supply room, her face pale, her breathing shallow, her eyes filled with a dizziness she couldn't hide. Jonathan rushed downstairs the moment he heard. He pushed through employees, knelt beside her, and touched her forehead. "Elena," he whispered, "talk to me." She shook her head faintly. I just stood up too fast. I haven't slept much. Or eaten, Jonathan felt. Something inside him crack. Something deep, personal, uncontrollable. This wasn't sustainable. This wasn't living. This was survival in its most brutal form. He lifted her gently to her feet. She swayed, and he steadied her with both hands. No more, he said firmly. His voice wasn't the voice of a boss anymore. It was the voice of a man who cared, deeply. Come with me. Sir. No, please, he whispered, softening. Let me help you. Something broke in her expression. The last fragments of resistance dissolved, replaced by exhaustion and a kind of silent surrender. She nodded, and for the first time, Elena allowed herself to lean on someone. A day that felt different. Jonathan took her to a quiet cafe near the park, far from the corporate world, far from her duties. He ordered food, warm tea, and let her sit in peace. At first, she looked uncomfortable, as if she didn't belong in such a place. But slowly, as the warmth of the tea spread through her, her shoulders relaxed. Why are you doing all this? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan searched for the right words. How could he tell her that she had changed him? That she had opened his eyes to a world he had never seen? That she had stirred a part of his heart he didn't know existed? He couldn't tell her yet, so he simply said the truth he could manage. Because you matter. Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching. No one had ever said those words to her, not with sincerity. She blinked, rapidly, holding back tears. Thank you, she whispered. They sat together in silence after that, not awkward, but comfortable. A silence that meant understanding, connection, something that had been building slowly between them, quietly, like a seed finally breaking the soil. As he drove her home later, Elena looked at him with a softness he hadn't seen before. Mr. Hale, she said, her voice fragile. If there is ever anything you want to tell me, I will listen. Jonathan's heart pounded. Maybe. She sensed it. Maybe she felt the truth waiting behind his silence. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. Because the revelation, the one thing he had been hiding, the secret that had changed his life the moment he saw it, needed the right moment. And that moment had not come. Ethan woke the next morning with a heaviness in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. The image of the old man's trembling hands and Beatriz's quiet determination clung to him like a shadow. Her world, humble, fragile, and held, together by sacrifice, now existed fully inside him, refusing to be ignored. He sat at the edge of his bed staring at the city skyline through the glass wall of his penthouse. The view was perfect, polished, and cold, exactly like the life he had built. For the first time, he felt a sharp contrast. While he was surrounded by luxury, Beatriz lived each day balancing exhaustion and hope, carrying responsibilities no one should shoulder alone. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had witnessed, something sacred. At the office, Ethan tried to resume his usual rhythm, early meetings, numbers, projections, board memos. Yet everything felt strangely hollow. Even when people spoke directly to him, their voices seemed distant, as if coming through water. He kept remembering how gently Beatriz had touched her father's forehead, how she had whispered in Portuguese, "Eu vou conseguir, pai. Eu prometo. I will manage, Dad. I promise." The phrase echoed through his mind the entire morning. By noon, he found himself wandering through the company halls with no destination. He paused near the maintenance room, the same door where he had first seen her with her worn-out uniform, quietly sweeping the polished marble floor. He remembered how invisible she had seemed to others, but now he saw her clearly. She was not just a cleaning worker, not just an employee, not someone living quietly in the background. She was a daughter fighting for someone she loved more than herself. Later that day, he overheard two supervisors discussing employee cuts, something the HR department had been proposing to reduce operational costs. When one casually mentioned that cleaning staff would be the easiest place to trim, Ethan felt something inside him tighten with anger. For years he had made decisions based solely on numbers, fully convinced that this was what made a strong leader. But now, after seeing the truth behind one of those numbers, he couldn't stay silent. He stepped into the room with an authority that made both supervisors straighten instantly. "No one touches the cleaning staff," he said sharply. "No cutbacks, no reduced hours. Not now, not ever, without my approval." They both nodded quickly, startled. Ethan left without further explanation, but his pulse was racing. He didn't quite understand yet why he felt so protective, but he knew he did. That afternoon he saw Beatriz working again, carrying a heavy cart full of supplies. She walked slowly, as if her bones ached from the night before. Ethan watched her discreetly from across the hall. She didn't notice him. She almost never raised her head while working. Everything about her day was effort and endurance. Something inside him ached at the sight. He approached her gently, trying not to startle her. "Beatrice," he said softly. She looked up quickly, slightly embarrassed, as if being addressed by the CEO made her feel she had done something wrong. "Yes, sir," she answered in careful English. "I wanted to ask—" Ethan hesitated, trying to choose his words. "How is your father today?" Beatrice blinked, startled that he remembered. No, startled that he cared. He is stable, thank God," she said, smiling nervously. "But the doctor says he needs a procedure soon. I'm trying to save money." Her voice was calm, but Ethan could hear the exhaustion underneath. "I see," he answered gently. "If you need a few days off, paid days, just let me know." Beatrice froze, her eyes widening. "Paid days? Sir, I cannot. Accept. The company already gives me so much. My salary, my job. I am grateful." "It's not charity," Ethan said. "It's support." Her eyes softened, unsure how to respond. Ethan felt the urge to tell her everything, to tell her he had followed her, that he knew her secret struggles. But he couldn't. Not yet. Something told him the moment wasn't right. He simply nodded, then walked away before his emotions revealed too much. For the rest of the week, Ethan felt a slow transformation inside him. One he couldn't fully define. He donated anonymously to the hospital, expanded employee health care policies, and even instructed HR to review the wages of the lowest-paid workers in the company. But inside, a different change was happening. Quieter, deeper. He wasn't thinking like a businessman anymore. He was thinking like someone who had seen truth, someone who had finally learned how heavy another person's battles could be when no one was watching. Every night he replayed the moment Beatriz had held her father's hand at the clinic. The humility of that scene haunted him. It shook something loose inside him, something that had been locked away. Empathy, vulnerability, and a strange, persistent desire to protect her. And yet, he still had not told anyone what he had discovered. Not his advisors, not HR, not even Beatriz, because he feared that once spoken aloud, the truth would demand even more from him, more than he was sure he could give. But the moment was coming. Soon he would no longer be able to hide what he had seen, or why it had changed him so profoundly. The days that followed became a strange and delicate dance inside Ethan's mind. He was no longer the man who walked through his company with mechanical confidence, thinking only in terms of profit, loss, and efficiency. Something had shifted, a tectonic movement within the soul that brought both discomfort and clarity. Every interaction, every meeting, every routine task seemed to glow with a different light. He found himself noticing things he had ignored for years. The tired eyes of employees working double shifts, the small tremor in an accountant's hands when she mentioned rising rent, the silence of workers who were always overlooked because their uniforms were simple and their tasks unseen. Ethan had built an empire without ever truly looking at the people who helped keep it standing. But now he couldn't stop looking, and, inevitably, his thoughts kept circling back to her, Beatriz. There was something about the quiet strength in her posture, the humility in her movements, the patience in her tone whenever she answered someone with respect, even when they barely acknowledged her. She reminded him of the kind of person he used to admire before his ambition consumed every part of him. But admiration wasn't the right word for what he felt now. It was deeper, warmer, more unsettling. He caught himself wondering how she managed to smile through exhaustion, how she found the courage to hold her life together with so little support, how she kept faith alive when everything seemed to push her into despair. One morning, he watched from his office window as she entered the building, carrying her small, worn backpack. She paused at the door to adjust her uniform. It wasn't vanity, it was dignity. She wanted to present herself well, even if no one noticed. And Ethan noticed. That afternoon, he attended a board meeting. The directors discussed expansion, new acquisitions, and aggressive market strategies. Their voices blended into one continuous drone. Normally, Ethan would lead the conversation with sharp precision, but today he felt detached. His thoughts drifted far from financial projections. He kept seeing that dimly lit clinic room, the frail man sleeping, Beatriz sitting beside him, her head resting near his hand, the soft prayer she whispered into the darkness. A lump formed in Ethan's throat as the image replayed over and over. Ethan, Mr. Talbot, one of the board members leaned forward. Your thoughts on the restructuring plan? Ethan blinked, realizing he had no idea what they had been debating. I think, he began slowly, that we should reconsider any restructuring that harms the workers on the ground, the ones who keep this place functioning. A few directors exchanged confused glances. Talbot frowned. With all due respect, that's not how we've approached things in the past. I know, Ethan replied, his voice quiet but firm. But the past doesn't always serve the future. There was a moment of uneasy silence. Then, surprisingly, no one argued further. Later that evening, Ethan decided to leave work early, something he rarely allowed himself, but his mind felt heavy and he needed clarity. He walked through the company corridors, letting his steps guide him without direction. Near the elevator, he heard the faint echo of someone humming softly. It was a gentle melody, familiar, Portuguese. He followed the sound and found Beatriz in one of the smaller conference rooms cleaning the glass table. She hummed absent-mindedly, unaware she was being watched, the soft tune filling the quiet space. It was a lullaby. He recognized it. It was the same melody she had murmured to her father. For a moment, Ethan simply watched her, feeling something fragile and profound settle inside his chest. Like a truth he had been running from was finally catching up. She turned slightly and noticed him. Her eyes widened, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Oh, sir, Mr. Bennett, I didn't see you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You don't need to apologize, he said gently. Your voice, it's beautiful. She froze again, stunned not by the compliment, but by the softness in his tone. No one in her position expected tenderness from a man like him. Thank you, she whispered, unsure of what else to say. Ethan took a small breath. He couldn't keep dancing around the truth forever. The moment was approaching, slowly, inevitably, when he would have to tell her what he had witnessed that night. But not yet. Not until he could do it in a way that honored her dignity. Instead, he asked, How is he today? Your father? Her expression softened. Stable, but tired. The doctor says we must decide soon about the surgery. And you? Ethan asked. How are you holding up? Her eyes shimmered with surprise. No one ever asked her that. I am trying, she said, her voice nearly cracking. Some days are harder than others. Ethan felt something inside him break, just the slightest. He wanted to help more than she knew. He wanted to protect her from every burden. He wanted to tell her she wasn't alone anymore. Not in this fight, not in this city, not in this world. But he held back. Instead, he nodded gently. If you need anything, anything at all, you can come to me. She gave him a small smile, one that was both grateful and hesitant. A smile of a woman who had learned long ago not to expect too much kindness from anyone. Then she left the room, returning to her work. Ethan watched her disappear down the hallway, and for the first time in his life he felt the weight of responsibility not toward a company, but toward a single human being. He didn't yet know how to tell her what he had seen. He didn't know how to express how much it had changed him. But he knew this. Soon, the truth would rise between them like dawn breaking through a long night. And when that moment came, nothing in Ethan's world, or hers, would ever be the same again. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay awake in the darkness of his penthouse, the city lights flickering through the windows like distant stars. But his mind wasn't on the skyline. It kept replaying every detail of the night he had followed Beatriz, every second of the moment that had brought his life to a complete standstill. He had kept the truth hidden, carefully, silently, not because he wanted to lie, but because he didn't know how to reveal something so personal, something that had reshaped the very core of who he was. But he could not hold it any longer, not after everything he had witnessed in the days that followed, not after watching Beatriz break and rebuild herself every single day. Not after realizing that the world he lived in was built on foundations she never had. It was time. The next afternoon, Ethan asked his secretary for something he had never requested in his entire professional life. Could you call Beatriz to my office, please? The secretary blinked twice, confused but obeyed. Minutes later, Beatriz stood in the doorway, nervous, clutching her small backpack, completely unsure why the CEO would ever summon her. You wanted to see me, sir? She asked softly. Yes, Ethan said, trying to calm the tremor in his chest. "Please, come in." She stepped inside, hesitant. Ethan motioned for her to sit, and she did, carefully, like someone afraid to break something. He took a breath. "There's something I need to tell you," he began. "Something I should have said days ago, but I didn't know how." Her eyebrows knitted with worry. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." He shook his head firmly. "You did nothing wrong. This is about me, not you." Beatriz relaxed only slightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on his face. Curious, cautious. Ethan looked down at his hands. He had delivered speeches to governments, negotiated with billionaires, built empires with his words. Yet now he felt like a boy learning to speak for the first time. "Beatriz," he said finally, "the night you left work early, the night you were crying, I followed you." Her breath caught. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy. Something in your face told me you were in pain, and I couldn't ignore it." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Beatriz's eyes shimmered, not with anger but with fear of what he might have seen. Ethan continued, voice soft. "I saw you go to the clinic." Her hands tightened around her backpack straps. "And I saw your father." Her eyes closed. "I saw the way you held his hand, the way you comforted him, the way you sang to him, the way you carried the weight of the world on your shoulders without asking anything from anyone." A small tear slipped down her cheek, but she said nothing. Ethan swallowed hard. "But that's not what changed my life." Her eyes opened slowly. "What changed my life," Ethan said, voice trembling, "was what your father said when he woke up." She gasped. "You weren't there," Ethan said. "You had stepped outside to talk to Arun, the doctor, and your father opened his eyes for a moment. He looked around. Then he whispered something I heard clearly." He paused. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely breathe. He said, Ethan whispered, "God, please bless my daughter. She works so hard, she suffers so much. Protect her. She has no one else in this world." A tear rolled down Beatriz's face. "But that's not all," Ethan added, voice breaking. Still half asleep, barely conscious, he smiled, and he said, "If only the world could see her the way I see her, they would understand what true greatness looks like." Beatriz's hand covered her mouth as she sobbed softly. Ethan felt his own eyes burn. "That moment," he said, "destroyed me. It broke something in me I didn't even know was there. All my life I've been surrounded by wealth, power, influence, but I have never seen a greater love or a purer strength than what I saw between you and your father that night." Beatriz cried without sound, tears falling onto her uniform. Ethan stepped closer, not too close, not wanting to frighten her, and spoke gently. "You changed me without even knowing. Your father changed me without ever meeting me. That night showed me what real humanity looks like, what true value is, what greatness really means." He took a breath. "And I decided that night that I would not let you carry this burden alone." Beatriz looked up, eyes wide, vulnerable, stunned. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Ethan reached into his drawer and placed a folder gently on the table between them. "I contacted the hospital," he said softly. "Your father's surgery, it's scheduled. The best surgeon in the state." Her breath stopped. "The cost?" Ethan said. "Already paid. Completely." She covered her face with both hands, sobbing harder, shaking with disbelief. "I also arranged a private nurse for his recovery," he continued, "and transportation, and an upgraded room so you can stay with him." Her shoulders trembled. "And," he added, voice softer than ever, "I increased your salary, effective immediately, and promoted you to a staff coordinator position so you will no longer work night shifts." She lifted her face slowly, eyes full of shock, gratitude, and confusion. Why would you do all this?" she whispered through tears. And that was when Ethan finally spoke the words he had held in his heart since that night. "Because when I saw you with your father," he said, voice shaking, "I realized that I had everything except the one thing you had." She blinked. "What?" "Love," he whispered. "Real love. Selfless, fearless, pure. The kind of love that makes ordinary people extraordinary." Silence filled the room. Ethan stepped back, giving her space, dignity, breath. "And because," he finished softly, "I cannot unsee what I saw. I cannot go back to the man I was. And I refuse to let someone like you carry such a battle alone when I have the power to help." Beatriz cried again, this time with a different kind of tears. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of someone who had carried pain so long she didn't remember what hope felt like. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Thank you. Thank you. You saved my father. Ethan shook his head gently. No, he said. You did. I just finally opened my eyes. And in that quiet office, where deals worth millions had been made, something more powerful happened. Two worlds touched. Two hearts changed. Two destinies shifted forever. And Ethan Bennett, the man who once believed money was the measure of a life, finally understood. A single act of love has more power than an entire empire.